All right. Welcome back, everybody. I know we had a delicious lunch down here in North Carolina. Wherever you are, I hope your lunch was also delicious. Glad you guys are back for this afternoon. We have our keynote speakers coming up. Pfeiffer University is here with us. We've got Mona Long, who's the database administrator, and Daniel Mynatt, who's the provost. I met these guys and their team at a SACS presentation at the accreditation conference. Thought it was very interesting. They are interesting people and dynamic. So I hope you guys enjoy it. If you do have questions throughout, you can send them in on the chat and Julia will help read them, of course. And in the room, you can just raise your hand. All right, I'll let you guys take it away.
All right, am I properly? Thank you. It's good to see everybody here today and everybody that is virtual. Mona and I have developed this presentation so that it can be interactive. How many of you all work at a college or university? Okay, how many of you have spent any time in a classroom teaching? Okay, so let me tell you, the best way for any presentation to crash and burn is if nobody does anything and you just sit there like a knot on the log. I am not going to allow that to happen. We've structured this presentation so that we will have plenty of time for questions, and you can stop us. This is also online would apply. You can stop us at any point. If we get bogged down in questions, we'll pause them and move along. But don't feel like you have to wait to the end, because by that point, a pregnant moment for a good question may have passed by. Okay. All right. Aim it towards the podium. Maybe I'm hitting the wrong button. Got it, just as soon as you got here. My name is Danny Mynatt, and you should call me Danny, not Dr. Mynatt. And I'm the provost at Pfeiffer. I've been there for 2 years. That'll come back up a little bit in the presentation. Before I was there, I was at a Baptist school in Central Texas for 10 years. And before that, I was at a Baptist school in the upstate of South Carolina for almost 20 years. But I am a North Carolina native. I was reared in Rutherford County. Anybody in the room know where that is? Nobody ever knows where Rutherford County is. Mona, would you like to introduce yourself before we get started?
My name is Mona Long. I am the database administrator for Pfeiffer University and have been since 2008. Prior to that, I was the controller at Pfeiffer University. And as such, I got to understand the finances of the university. Prior to that, I was in the banking industry and I was a commercial loan underwriter. So I understood financial statements, cash flows, loan repayments, all that fun stuff. So I had a finance background before I moved to higher ed. And I think that has laid the foundation for what you're going to see today in terms of the analysis and the presentation.
Okay. Oh, one other thing, Mona and I have something in common that we didn't know about till we landed at Pfeiffer together. Mona and I are both graduates of Wake Forest University, go Deeks, and we were there together. But she didn't pay any attention to me because I was a really nerdy dork in those days. But yes, we were Wake Forest graduates. We are Wake Forest graduates. Here's an outline of where we're going to go. I'm going to take you through the introduction of how did Pfeiffer find itself in this mess. Mona is the one with the economics background, and she's going to work you through the model. Now, that is frequently where this presentation kind of slows down, and that's fine. We've built in time for it to slow down, but that is where this presentation slows down. She'll go through the nuts and bolts of how this works. Feel free to stop her and ask questions about this. I'll come back and talk about the strengths and weaknesses and how, if you were interested in applying this, then we can help you with that, how you might want to do it. And we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. This presentation originated for a SAC-COC concurrent session, which we gave in December last year. And for those presentations, the learning outcomes need to be stated, not implied. So this is what we hope you will take away from this. We hope that you will understand this revenue-based model. This is not a credit hour production model, and I'll get back to that later in the presentation. This does not depend on credit hour production. This is not an efficiency model. It is a revenue-based model, and we really hope that you will understand that, what its strengths and weaknesses are, and how you could understand the variables and how they would apply to your place. Okay. How did the university find itself in this mess? Well, let's start in 2019. The university, so our current CFO is right there. She is clearly not in prison. Our former CFO was sentenced to federal prison in 2019 for embezzlement. That is never a good thing, is it? Your CFO, who had been at Pfeiffer he's out now, but he went to federal prison, okay, for embezzlement. Pfeiffer, let me pause here to describe Pfeiffer. Pfeiffer is a small school affiliated with United Methodist Church. We have about 1,100 students on a good day. It's not quite half and half graduate and undergraduate. About 60% of our undergraduate students are Pell eligible. So we have a lot of poor students. And now that's part of our mission, okay? God calls some people to educate folks who don't otherwise have a chance in a very rural section of North Carolina. That would be us. And so we embrace that mission, but students who are frequently poor don't have a lot of money, right? And so we have a lot of poor students. Our percentage of students who are of color is higher than your typical private school, certainly higher than Central North Carolina. So all that is to say is Pfeiffer had never been a Davidson, okay? This is not a wealthy school. And one thing I would certainly like to emphasize is how devoted our faculty and staff are to this mission. We have people who have been at this institution for their entire careers, every year dealing with difficult financial struggles. But there's nothing quite like seeing that person go across the stage who has come from difficult backgrounds, and we've managed to put them across. In addition to the Meisenheimer campus, there is a health campus in Albemarle where we have an occupational therapy program and a physician assistant program, PA and OT. So that's a little description. So Pfeiffer didn't have a lot of money to throw away on the CFO going to prison, okay? 2020, and I won't tell you exactly how this happened. I don't think it was one of Pfeiffer's best moves, but Pfeiffer had an interaction with SAC COC, our university accreditor, and as a result of that, not only did we not get what we wanted, instead we got put on warning for 2 of the standards, financial resources and financial documents, and we were put on a monitoring period. In September of 2020, it got worse. We were continued on warning, and we were added to the number of standards we were found not in compliance with. It was increased. If you need me to explain any of these standards, I'm happy to do so. I'm the SAC COC liaison for our campus. But wait, it gets worse. In 2021, the university was placed on probation for these 2 standards. I came on June the 1st, and we were put on probation a week later. And so we went on probation for these 2 standards, financial resources and financial responsibility. In 2022, SAC COC appointed a special committee. That is a very antiseptic name, but if you ever have a special committee come to your campus, that is a bad thing. That means you're in financial trouble or you've lied about something. Generally, that's what that means. So the special committee came to review to see whether we were in compliance with these 2 standards where we were on probation. And I'm being taped, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say here. There was a committee of 3 that came. They were from peer institutions. Nothing was inappropriate. Nothing was inappropriate. Nothing was inappropriate. They tended to be from institutions wealthier than we are. That's not hard to do. But they tended to be from wealthier institutions. And from the moment they got there to the moment they left, I don't think they were impressed by anything. Is that a fair statement? That's maybe a little conservative. Anyway, at the end, they recommended that we stay on probation. Now, for all of you who don't understand how this works, you can stay on probation for a 2nd year. And after that, you know what happens? You're out, and you can no longer participate in the federal financial aid program, which for a school like us, did I mention 60% Pell eligible, CFO in prison? Not being able to participate means we stay in operation until our net assets are gone, and then we close up shop. You know, we stay in business for another year, and we're done. We're done. So they recommended that we stay on probation for that last year to see what would happen, to see if we could right our ship. In the meantime, we have a complete turnover in leadership. So if you were to go today to one of Dr. Bullard, our president's also here. If you came to a president's cabinet meeting today versus 5 years ago, is there anybody there? It has completely turned over. Yes, it has completely turned over. That's right. So in the meantime, there was a complete turnover in leadership. New CFO, she's right there. Remember, she's not the one in prison. New president, he's right there. New provost, that's me. And then everybody else eventually. So leadership completely turns over while this huge crisis is unfolding. Is there a happy ending? Is there a happy ending? Thank you for that. You're still paying attention. There is a happy ending. Dr. Bullard went down and gave the speech of his life. So if you have never been on probation, this is not a good experience. That you are you are treated differently when you're on probation. The first thing you have to do is to file with SAC-COC your teach out plan for every degree program that the university has. And that has to go on file immediately. So the assumption is if you go belly up, now you know what we're going to do with all your students. I guess that makes sense. I mean, after all, what we're about is our students. So one of the other things you have to do is go to a board meeting and justify to the board why you need to still be.
Speaking of the board, do you mind actually elaborating a bit on the Board of Trustees at this time?
Which board? The SAC-COC board or our board?
Your Board of Trustees.
Let me come back to that in just a second.
Fantastic.
Thank you. You have to go before the SAC-COC board and explain why you deserve to stay. It is a presumption of guilt against you. And I understand why this happens. I'm just telling you that my previous experience was not in, I'd never been on probation before. So this was all a learning curve for me. Anyway, Dr. Bullard went there and gave the speech of his career. And this committee that had recommended against us, their recommendation was set aside. And so last June, we were released from sanction. Now, I should have mentioned this earlier. It actually gets worse in the sense that we were put on probation in the year we were supposed to go up for reaffirmation. This is all very complicated. It's like a perfect storm. And if you're going up for reaffirmation, they will not let you do that while you're on probation. So as soon as we got off of probation, we went right into reaffirmation. And if you've ever done that, I have been on 17 visiting committees. So I've been on the other side of the table. When I say this, I say it with all love. Your reaffirmation is a lot like your colonoscopy every 10 years. It's something that happens every 10 years. It's necessary. The prep is horrible, but in the end, it gets you a clean bill of health. You can take that as you wish. So in September 2020, and I am coming back to that question. I haven't forgotten about it. September of 2022, we finally entered our reaffirmation and we started that process as of last March when the committee came, we were cleared of all of the standards except the QEP. And the QEP is, if you don't know, is a special project. It is one of the standards, but it's not one of the continuing things that you have to monitor, all the time to be a healthy institution. Now, hopefully in December at the annual SACS meeting, we will be completely set free from our long ordeal with SAC-COC. But as of right now, we've got the happy ending, at least with regard to finances, and we've gotten free of being on sanction from our accreditor. Let me go back just a minute to hit this question. So notice, maybe this is where this question came up, and I may ask Dr. Bullard to give a comment here because I was not here. We did go on warning, which is sanction, for core requirement 4.1 governing board characteristics because the SAC-COC felt that our board of trustees had not given us adequate oversight. I'm going to guess that's what's prompted that question. I don't know. I was not at the institution at that time. All I know is that was also the first sanction. That was the first one that we got cleared of also.
I will say that
Go ahead. Yes,
okay?
please. Yeah.
4.1 was rooted in lack of oversight of the CFO by the president who was reporting to the board. Obviously, but I hate to say this in public, but our spending policy in our bylaws, you spend 5%, 4 to 6% of the corpus of your endowment. And the board authorized in back-to-back years a 20% draw and a 22% draw on the endowment to stay open. And this was in fiscal year 18 and fiscal year 19, or fiscal year 17 and fiscal year 18. So this Sachs didn't realize this until, 2019 or 2020. But when I came in, I rewrote all the spending policies, leaning on other college presidents. And every board meeting, we had a board education session on the agenda, and we had a different speaker each time. Just lay the wood to, if you know what I mean, just lay the wood to the board on spending and spending policies, and things like adding signatures if a purchase is $100,000, or add a board member's signature if you're entering into a contract exceeding $250,000, I think. So that we got that cleared up, and probably had some help from our Sachs VP, but we got that cleared up first.
Yeah, that was the first one.
They probably should have made me fire the entire board, but they did not. Yeah, we just fired about half of them.
Okay, so I show up as the new provost, and we clearly have got to get our expenses under control. Okay, that one of the first conversations I had with the chair of our Budget and Finance Committee meeting, which actually started this whole thing that we're talking about here. He said, for example, we had three religion, we had more religion faculty than we had religion majors. Okay. And that may be a bit of an exaggeration, but I'd have to think about it. It's not much of one. It depends on how you count them. It's always how you count them, right? Okay, so we were talking, he said, we've got to get this revenue thing under control, and Mona's got this calculation about how to do it. And I said, well, it's good that I am so close to retirement, because typically the last thing a new provost wants to do is come in and slash. That's the way to make friends, right? But my mortgage is paid for and I'm near retirement, right? So what the hell? All right. So when I arrived, we had 84 faculty lines. Now we have 61 faculty lines. And of those 61, 13, again, it depends on how you count them, 13-ish are in our health sciences programs, which are very regulated by their accreditors. Those are untouchable. Those are untouchable. So you really could separate those out. And so we started discontinuing faculty. Isn't that very antiseptic? We started discontinuing faculty right and left. The board set some committees into place to discontinue non-profitable programs. Now, this is why you all are here. How do you determine a non-profitable program? How did I get from there to there? This is what Mona's going to tell you about. You're up, Mona.
Okay. I'm on. All righty. And which is the button I use to advance?
Oh, I can help you with it if you want, but it is.
That one.
Just point it right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Okay. This revenue model that we've developed, it was institutional research and I worked together. Being database administration and former controller, I understood the finances, I understood the general ledgers, I understood the database and where all the numbers are stored. So I worked with institutional research and we came up with this. And there is actually a white paper that was published in 2013, and it was the Bill Gates and Melinda Gates Foundation white paper. You're familiar with it evidently because you're shaking your head. And the particular white paper that I'm referencing, oh, I need to speak up. And then project. Okay, let me see if I can do better. This white paper, it has a ton of information, and you can take this type of model as deep as you want to go. You can allocate as many expense lines as you want to allocate. We elected to go fairly shallow with this because we assumed if it's not profitable at a shallow level, it's certainly not going to be profitable at a deep level. So why deep dive when you can get by with hopefully a nice sort of, wading into the pool, not jumping in the deep end. So we started off looking at the majors, the head counts, the individuals, the students, and we did do trend analysis. We went back 5 years to see if we were, if what we're seeing today is reflective of what we've been seeing, and it did. We really had not changed personalities much in terms of composition of what programs were well attended and what programs were waning off or declining in demand. So we did take a combination of gen eds, major requirements, electives, everything. And what we've developed is a shopping cart approach, because an undergrad student, when they are taking courses, they can take in any particular semester an elective, a general education, or potentially a major requirement. We don't price them out differently. We charge a flat rate for 12 to 19 hours. How are you going to determine which ones are profitable when their shopping cart, what is the profit margin of their shopping cart? Does that make sense? Because you can take an expensive class, you can take a cheap class. Some students can take all cheap classes, some students can take all expensive classes. You've got to sort of understand what each shopping cart is looking like and what is an average shopping cart. What is the margin of a shopping cart that you're aiming for? What can you tolerate in terms of your expenses and the value of that shopping cart? So.
Right button.
Right.
You got it. There you go.
Right button.
Oh, no, the other button. Whatever I said, do the opposite. There you go. Good job.
At the beginning of the semester, we charge that flat rate. How much does it take to deliver those courses? What is the profit margin? Evidently, I went ahead. Our ERP systems, that's one of the things that the white paper from the Bill Gates Foundation talked about, was your databases and your informations that are sitting in your databases allow you to track a lot of data right down to the student level. That wasn't the case years ago because you couldn't, the systems weren't there. But so many of our ERP systems now allow you to track all the way down to the student level. So we are able to pull in tuition. We're able to pull in discount, what our financial aid is, and our institutional financial aid is per student. We're able to see what students are taking what courses, what faculty is teaching that course, how many faculty, is it a load bearing, how many load bearing faculty are doing it? Is it team taught? You could even potentially have cross-listed classes that you need to be careful of when you're looking at your data, so that you get a true good understanding of how many courses, how many faculty, and how many students are associated with each course. That allows you to look at the net revenue that's generated by that course. The two expenses that are most expensive on our balance sheet and income statement, our two greatest ones are probably your two greatest ones. First one is compensation. And that's compensation across the board. That's faculty, staff, athletics, it's every but compensation and then institutional discount. Those two lines alone make up about 80% of our expenses in the general operations. Am I still right about that? That's been the case since I was the controller, and I was the controller 20 years ago. That hasn't changed, and I'm guessing that's what it is for each of your institutions. It's going to be about 75 to 80%. So if you can get those two numbers right, and if you can analyze and understand those two numbers and apply them back to the courses, then you can get a fairly decent net revenue calculator, because the other 20% is really not going to significantly impact you. Does that make sense? The old 80-20 rule. So that's why I'm saying we didn't take a really, really deep dive, as long as we're working with those two numbers. The net revenue for the shopping cart then is for every potential type of course. What we're doing is we're taking, let me see, because we're getting the net revenue for every course that's in every shopping cart. The cost to teach the course, this is the big driver. You can generate the revenue from the student, but what is the cost to teach the course? We're looking at faculty compensation. We're looking at their instructional load to get a per credit hour rate for that faculty member. We're taking the course credit hours, we're multiplying it by that rate to get a compensation associated for that course. Then the next thing we're doing is we're taking that compensation for that course and we're dividing it by the enrollment. And that's going to give you your student cost for that course. So as they're putting that in the shopping cart, that's telling you what the faculty cost is associated with that class that went into that shopping cart. Does that make sense? That's the faculty cost only. The faculty compensation needs to be analyzed so that only the amount of instruction is used in the calculation. Faculty do a lot more than just teach. Some faculty may have a load exemption. Is that what they call it?
Yeah, that's in the example.
Yeah, here's the example.
Yeah.
History department chair who also is doing some other administrative functions. This particular one, he got a one course release. So he's only teaching 4 out of
3.
Release out of 4. So he's teaching 3. So you need to allocate that compensation somewhere else. It's not associated with what he's doing in the classroom. The cost to teach the course in a student's cart are then totaled and assigned to the major. So we take all of their courses, we take the cost associated with that course, and we assign it to the major to determine the major's revenue. Notice we're not really doing anything with space. We're not doing anything with energy costs. We're not doing anything with depreciation. We're not doing anything. We're just pretty much just looking at that point at the faculty's cost. That's what we're assuming it takes to teach. Because the space, the space is, good God, 100 years old, 90 some years old. It's already fully depreciated. The energy costs, we're not allocating. We're not going that deep. Not to say that you can't. You can if your systems allow it. So in addition to the load that and the understanding the faculty's compensation to teach, load and overloads for each faculty must be determined. You have to compensate for extra labs, internships. How do you calculate the load? The institutional aid, we assign that to the major as well. Operational expenses are associated with the major, and the endowment support, monies from the endowment draws could potentially offset some of that discount. You need to understand how that is allocated. If you can identify that at the student level, so it follows the student through their major or through their programs, that would be highly beneficial. Because of our endowment rating that occurred those couple of years, and then the blessing of COVID and the COVID support that we received from federal and state governments, we have not taken an endowment draw in how many years, Robin? In 3 years. So I have not had the challenge of allocating any endowment in any of the analysis in the last 3 years. So, but when that time comes, we will analyze it based upon the student level. I'll go back to the advancement area and ask them who they used and how much they assigned to each individual student. Because our database, we do not allocate it that way in the general ledger. So that's going to have to be an additional step that I do outside of the GL. Additional complications. Team talk courses. You need to understand the load and how it's recorded in your database if you're pulling and extracting it out of the system like I do. Does your system allow you to do that? You need to work really closely with your DBA or the person that knows and understands your system if you're doing the extractions out of the system, which I'm assuming most of you would be. The cross-listed courses, you need to pay attention to those because you don't want to, you need to consolidate them to get the accurate enrollment in that. And then how are your science courses taught? We have a common lecture with different lab times. And the way we do it in our database, it's not all that friendly when you're pulling it out to analyze it. If you've got a common lecture and then individual courses set up to represent the lab, then that would work beautifully. Ours is set up as lecture lab is a class, lecture lab is a class, lecture lab is a class, but that lecture is a common lecture. So it looks inflated in the system. If you're calculating a load and you pull how many credits is this faculty member teaching, it looks like they're teaching, 24 in a semester. They're not, because they're teaching 4 lectures that are 3 hours. It's the way it's 12 when it's really only a 1 3-hour lecture. So you have to understand how the system is laid out in your database or your ERP system. We are a Genzabar school. I don't know if any of your other schools or if y'all are Genzabar, Banner, but again, you need to understand the structure of how the data is stored to get an accurate analysis. The additional expenses, we did allocate some additional expenses and some additional salaries. We picked ones that we felt were truly on the academic side of the house. We left the true administrative side of the house alone, like my compensation, the president's compensation. We didn't want to go through the allocating across different graduate school, PA program, OT program. We just sort of went with the provost and the administrative side of the house. So we went with academic support, registrar, provost office, and the library and assessment. The lower the enrollment in the lower the enrollment in demand for a program, the more sensitive the analysis becomes, because the composition of students making up the program. Like I was saying earlier, you've got some students that are going to be taking a bunch of gen eds and a bunch of potentially maybe 1 or 2 major courses. That's going to be your freshmen and your sophomores that are trying to get the gen eds out of the way earlier. Typically, a gen ed class is high enrollment, which means the cost per student is going to be a lot lower, which means their shopping cart is going to have a much greater profit margin. Okay. Your seniors and your juniors may be taking a lot more of your major classes, okay, which are going to typically be smaller enrollment, higher cost per student. So their shopping carts, you expect those to be potentially a little less of a profit margin. However, some majors, by the time you're a senior, you may only need 1 or 2 courses, and then you may need a bunch of electives to balance out, because you've already got your gen eds and you've already met your major requirements. So you're pretty much just trying to fill out your complement of 120 credit hours. So you may be hitting a lot more of electives. You may be pursuing a minor degree or a minor with your program. You may be pursuing a second major. We didn't allocate across second majors. Your primary major was where your money went. You can, if you choose to, if you've got a lot of double majors, split them apart, split their shopping carts, let half go with each major. It just really depends on what you see in your database and what you see as your student composition. The other thing that you have to remember is discounts are not controlled by the academic side of the house. They're not picking and choosing who is enrolling in their program. The students are controlling that. They don't set the discount rate. The admissions department awards those institutional scholarship amounts. So in some regards, you need to pay attention to that discount rate to make sure that you are not, that you're not penalizing a department or a program just because they have a high discount. Especially if they've got, again, a low enrollment number, you've got to pay attention to what you're seeing. This is really a tool. It's not going to answer all of your questions. You're still going to have to understand what it's telling you. You cannot simply go, well, okay, here's the cutoff line. Let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of that program. Again, class composition, you need to understand class composition. One of the reports that I've done recently is to take it apart and split it. Take the program and split it across between freshmen, sophomore, junior, and seniors to see if there's any differential in profit margins relative to class. And there was specifically in the nursing program, because the nursing program, the nursing students and freshmen and sophomores, they're doing a lot of their gen eds and a lot of their non-nursing classes. The true nursing faculty start teaching them in their junior and senior years. Well, the nursing faculty is a very expensive faculty. So the profit that was being generated by the nursing program was coming from your freshmen and your sophomores. You were actually losing money in your juniors and your seniors. They were not profitable because of the of when they're taking those classes. So you still have to look at things. Come on. Okay, here's the report itself. This is coming out from an Access database. I take a lot of my data feeds coming out of Genzabar and I throw them into Access tables and then start working with them and building the report table that I'm needing here. Biology is a very well-attended program. Oh, sorry, I'm doing it again. Apologize. Biology is a well-attended program. This was for 21-22, and then we only had the fall numbers at that time. So we had 51 students enrolled at that time with a discount of 61.81%. And that's probably about average for our discount rate, or at least it was at that time. It might be a little high, Okay. The tuition revenue from the students that were enrolled was 51 students, amounted to almost 800,000. The institutional aid was about almost 491,000. The SEOG match, I pulled that in because that is something that we as an institution have to pay. So that gave us a net revenue, faculty compensation, the allocated expenses that we allocated from the various departments, some direct expenses. Biology has their own little operational budget. Course fee revenue. If there is any fee revenue offset that is specific to the biology classes, we brought that in. Then we had, all in all, a net contribution to the additional institutional expenses. While I say it's a net profit, I really hate that term as far as net profit because there are still unallocated expenses. So this is relatively money that can be used to support other areas of the institution. It's truly not a net profit, if that makes any sense. So we've got almost $200,000 coming from those 51 students at that time. I also wound up doing a fall average for you so that you could see roughly what an average student's shopping cart is going to generate. Here's music. Music, significant factor. I mean, you can see a really big difference here between biology. We only had 7 students that were majors with a 56% discount, which was probably a little less than average. Institutional aid, SEOG match, and look at the faculty compensation there. Significantly higher than what we had, I think, in biology, relatively speaking. all in all, those 7 students generated a $53,000 loss when you look at the allocations and you look at where other expenses. This program was extremely weak, is a good way of saying it. I guess a nice way of saying it. The strengths and weaknesses includes the discount rate by student, includes full and part-time faculty. The adjuncts are in here as well. Includes administrators' cost and salaries, but it doesn't include everything at the university. If you have adjunct costs that are tied to a specific course, instead of going through the rigors, you could potentially just use that adjunct cost and that course and calculate that course specifically. It all depends on how you can extract data, how easily it is to extract the data, and how deep you want to go into the allocation of the cost. We did include libraries, we include general ed, and as Danny has said, it is not a credit hour production or efficiency model. Danny, would you
Yeah.
like to explain that?
Yes, so, thank you.
Uh-huh.
So, a question that comes up often at this spot is, did the faculty understand this metric? And did they understand that you were creating for them perverse incentives? Because what we are, the math major, which we subsequently discontinued, the math major didn't have a lot of students, and all of them were heavily scholarshiped, right? So these students were generating no profit for us. And so the question it was, did the faculty understand that you're creating perverse incentives for them because you don't want the honors kids in your program now? And my response was two-part. Number one was, believe it or not, Mona and I stood in front of the faculty in a faculty assembly and explained all this right in front of all of them. That's part one. We did explain it. Part two was, I'm going to guess at that point they were so angry that they did not understand anything about how this is going to work. And the subsequent, and I don't mean that to be condescending, it's just what happened. They did not understand the perverse incentives. Now, if we really did not target programs that were high honor student programs, that was not, we took that into account. But the faculty, especially based on their reaction and subsequent questions, we got the feeling that they really didn't understand this at all. Now, why am I telling you this? It's because most of what they had seen before were credit hour efficiency models, which are, I used religion as an example before. So I have 3 degrees in religion, and my first 10 years were as a religion professor. I was a very efficient religion professor. I taught 3 gen ed sections and 1 upper level section. Those 3 gen ed sections, had 40 students in them apiece. I was generating lots and lots and lots of credit hours. Aren't I a good investment? Well, we had 2 or 3 majors because nobody was wanting to major in religion, and this was in the early 90s. Now it's even worse. So am I a good investment? If you need somebody to come in and teach a bunch of general education courses, the answer would be
Probably not. Probably not.
But if you
It depends upon your compensation.
yeah, I'm a religion professor.
Oh,
So my compensation is going to be bad.
okay.
Okay, I should have said that. Sorry, I should have said that.
You're going to be a low-paid faculty member.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry, that was just an assumption on my part.
Well,
Yeah, at my previous institution, we actually did a very interesting salary scale, and we found out that religion professors and English professors competed to be the worst paid faculty on the entire faculty by a good bit.
So then, yes, you would have been a good investor.
Yeah, because we're a dime a dozen.
Right.
And so, yes, in terms of, if you want me to come in and teach a bunch of hours, I'm a great investment. That's credit hour efficiency. If you need to figure out, if I fire, 6 professors, I need to know how many credit hours they're producing, right? Because I've got to fill adjuncts in for all that, right? That's credit hour. Now, if I have 3 religion majors, even though I'm a low paid guy on the totem pole, I have 3 religion majors. According to the Mona analysis, am I a good investment? I'm a horrible investment, right? Because there's no revenue based on the religion major. So this is not a credit hour efficiency model, and they have their place. They tell provosts interesting things. So when I lay off certain folks, I have to know, do I have an adjunct pool that can come in and fill those in? And in religion and English, that's a lot easier than like in economics. Okay, so that's something you've got to factor in. That's not just about revenue. One of the things that Mona had to reteach me 2 or 3 times when she was telling me this about this model is, I consider this a weakness, you may not, but students don't have to be taking courses in the major to be counted in the major. Does that make sense? So if I'm we have no physics major. If I'm a physics major and I'm taking nothing but general education courses, and I leave the institution before I start taking physics courses, my shopping cart is going to the physics major. So I might be a very profitable physics major, and I'm not taking any physics courses. That's one reason that Mona said you've got to kind of look at this by year, because when I get up and start taking physics courses, and there's only 3 of us, now I am not profitable at all. We ignored this. This actually was the biggest complaint I got from the faculty, that for our purposes, we ignored double majors because there's no new revenue for that second major. Now, as she said, you can split them, but there were so few of them, we decided to just ignore it. And I would occasionally get, especially the like cross between psychology and criminal justice, you're not giving us our due. Well, if you're only talking about 10 folks or so, it's negligible. It's negligible, right? It's a lot of Mona's time.
Well, and another interesting point about that, when we did start, because we took their feedback seriously and we investigated, and I looked at the double majors, and it's interesting you pulled psychology and criminal justice out as an example. We probably had 10 primary psychology majors with a secondary criminal justice major. And we probably had 8 primary criminal justice majors with a secondary psychology major. So in some regards, unless those shopping carts were vastly different, they were going to pretty much wipe each other out, because you're going to divide half goes to psychology for 10 of them, half goes to criminal justice for 10. On the other flip side, 8 of them stay with criminal justice and half of it goes back to psychology. You can split them apart, but you also need to realize there's a lot of cross-pollination between those double majors that may make it a lot of work for not a lot of difference in the analysis. The analysis, it may not be statistically material for you to go through those rigors, or you can actually go through the rigors and see if it is statistically different.
Now, I'm going to plant a seed here. When we finally get to the Q&A slide, one of you needs to raise your hand and say, Mona, how long does this analysis take you each year? Got it? Somebody needs to ask that question. All right. So we only include academic affairs expense. We could have priced out physical plant insurance. As Mona said, the Pfeiffer is a campus that was built partly in the 30s and partly in the 50s. It's fully depreciated. What we were looking for is how much revenue the majors generated. It's not like we were going to, sell the campus to start another major. The campus is a sunk cost. But that does tell you, if you're a major, if one of these majors is marginally profitable, there's no reason to celebrate, because in fact, they're not profitable when you figure in heat, air, insurance, maintenance. Okay, this was interesting. Load has to be teased out precisely. And one of the nice things about the faculty for this is we came to a better understanding of how the department chairs actually calculate load, because they hadn't been worrying about that quite as with as much detail as they really needed to be. So do you keep up with your load and release time, and how much release time are you giving your folks? All right, how can this be applied to your institution? Point number one.
Danny, do you mind if we interrupt quickly?
Yes.
I did hear a pregnant pause there, so I took my opportunity.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Mona, do you mind letting us know how long this analysis takes you to complete each year? And I apologize if I jumped the gun here and if you were getting to it, but
Fine, thanks.
perfect. Thank you.
It takes me between 2 and 3 weeks to get it done per semester. Obviously, I'm doing it at different times. I think I've done the fall for this particular semester. I'm still waiting on some data to do the spring analysis. And yes, I know spring has ended and we're now in the summer, so I should be able to get it done, but I am waiting on one piece of information.
It's coming.
It's coming, okay. And actually it's the faculty load because I calculated it and presented information to Danny, and Danny took it back to the deans, and he has now tasked the deans of the graduate program and the undergraduate program to do their own load calculations so that they can understand what their faculty are doing. I think they were a bit surprised at some of the load values that I came up with. So it takes me between 2 and 3 weeks.
Yeah, the interesting part of that story is Mona calculated load using precisely the load values that are our faculty handbook. And remember, I was relatively new, and I handed that off to the department chairs and particularly the undergraduate dean, and they said, oh, no, that's not how we do it at all. And I said, well, that's what's in the handbook. Well, the handbook's wrong. The handbook needs to be changed, which we have now done, and that's the piece you're waiting on. So anyway, how can you apply this to your institution? The obvious answer would be to hire Mona as a very expensive consultant. She can train up your folks in the way they should go at a really high price. The purpose of this presentation is to really empower you to do this on your own. Mona will be very happy to consult with you, or if you want to talk to her, her contact information is going to be at the end, at the slide at the end, and she's happy to be in touch with you. Just keep in mind, I'm the PT Barnum of this outfit. I just recognized a good presentation when I saw it. And I was trying, if you give a presentation at the SACS meeting, your registration is comped, and I'm cheap. And so I said, this is going to be good, Mona. We're gonna go on the road with this. But Mona is the one who has the background in economics and actually understands it. Okay. I think one of the hardest things to do is you've got to get the data. Can you get the data in all the pieces you need to use in this model? If you've already got all that data, then you can apply this model. You just have to have the time to go hammer it out.
Yep.
But if your system won't let you do the data, then this model is useless to you. unless you can reconfigure it. And if you want to ask about any of these data points, Mona can answer in just a little bit. Do you have somebody on your campus that has the time and the expertise? I guess, Mona, the only reason you started doing this is because Benny started annoying you, and that's our chair of our trustee finance committee, and said, we got to figure out some way to do this, right?
Yes, and like I said at the beginning, me and the institutional research folks are the ones that really started and looking at, they found the white paper. We discussed the possibilities of doing it using a shopping cart method and found that it seemed to be the most logical way to approach it based upon how our revenue is collected in terms of you're charging it out 12 to 18 hours is this lump sum of money, regardless of how many hours you take, 12 or 19, this is still what you're paying us is this flat rate. But you then have to understand, well, how profitable are we for each student? And this is what this is trying to determine is how profitable is each student? Then you associate that profitability of that student to the programs they're attending. And you're going to find out, or we found out in our committee for the undergraduate that your low enrolled programs are obviously the ones that are the most expensive to operate. We did keep English
Yes.
as a major. And did we keep religion?
It still exists
It
for
still
another
exists.
reason.
Right. And I don't know if you want to go ahead and get into that reason. It had to do with mission. What is the mission of your university? Us being a United Methodist Church affiliated university, we felt it was important that we still keep a religion major because it aligns with the mission of the university. So it's not, this isn't a cut and dried model. You still have, it's a tool to help you analyze and determine what is the direction we as a university need to go, or what can we get rid of, what can we keep, what should we keep?
Yeah, so, music programs are always expensive, right? They're always expensive. But if your board wants you to keep the music program, what Mona's model shows you is how much money you're going to lose each semester because you've made this commitment, and then you've got to make it up somewhere else. But it does tell you how bad off it is. Yes.
Since we're in a room with CFOs and CPAs, you want to just say it?
No, go ahead. I can't read your mind. I'll let you do it.
This is your presentation. The other thing that as a historically United Methodist school, is if a quarter of your endowment is tied up in religion scholarships or endowed chairs of religion, you have to make a calculated decision about how much time and social capital and political capital you want to spend as a president, or your VP for advancement wants to spend on unraveling a religion scholarship. Hey, I know Aunt Sally is dead, but she really wanted this portion of the endowment to educate future United Methodist ministers. Now that there are fewer and fewer people interested in becoming one of those, would you unrestrict this portion of the endowment? And I mean, honestly, it's mission fit, but it's also time and energy and money. I mean, it's a.
Yeah.
And again, because we did not take endowment draws, that support, that financial support that would have come from the endowment was missing from some of these numbers. So you also, I'm still on. That's critical that you understand what is going into the model in terms of revenue and support and expense. It's not something that you just enter into ignorantly. You really have to understand what's going on.
So the last bullet point. So if you can get the data and you've got somebody like Mona who can do the calculations, you can make this model work and you can do a revenue-based approach for every degree program you teach. It's not that hard once you get all these data. I know at this point I was asked previously, like, is this really worth it? Is it really worth it? And my answer was, let's recall, CFO is in prison and we're bleeding revenue. My choice is not cut or not cut. My choice is what to cut. And I don't want to accidentally cut a program based on something that is not research empirically based. I don't want to cut a program based on, do I like the faculty or not? That's, I know provosts are evil, but that's not what I need to do. And so if you find yourself in a situation where the decision you're making is what to cut, then I would say it is well worth, because we have so far, we've cut a lot of programs and we haven't made a missed call yet, wouldn't you say? I don't think so.
I would think the CFO would know that better than me.
Yeah, we haven't made a missed call yet.
I don't think we've had a significant drop in revenue because of a bad mistake or a bad choice. I don't see that being an issue. Our enrollment numbers have remained relatively consistent. Our undergraduate enrollment this year is we're projecting for it to go up this year. So we really haven't seen any ill effects from a bad decision. And when I was in loan underwriting, you had 4 possible outcomes when you underwrote a loan or made a loan decision. You could have identified a good loan as a bad loan and not made it. That's a bad outcome. You could have identified a bad loan as a good one and made it. That's really bad, because that is actual, a loss on your statements, that you wind up eating that loan. You don't get that money back. You can identify a bad loan as a bad loan. That's a good one. And you can identify a good loan as a good loan. That's a good one. So you really, out of 4 possible outcomes, only one was, well, 2 were potentially bad, but 1 was really bad. And I don't feel like we've identified, I don't think we've identified a bad program as a good one. And I don't think we've identified a good program as a bad one. I don't feel like we've made a wrong step using this analysis. And again, we took into consideration things that are not in the numbers as well. Just like I said, mission-driven, liberal arts, endowment support, the social and political capital. We took in factors that were beyond the report as well. So I feel like we did a good job.
So we, based on the clock on the wall back there, we have about 12 minutes left for just open field questions.
We have a question in the room, and then we also have a couple of chat questions as well. So
what made you decide to cut programs instead of keeping students longer? So
for most of the programs we cut, we were bleeding. So in essence, every time a student signed up for the math program, the institution was losing money because it cost us more to educate that student in math than we got out of it. So we cut programs that were negative. The question was, which negative programs do we cut? Did I say that?
I think so, yeah. Because a lot of our math faculty were teaching gen ed courses. They were not teaching math majors, but the few math majors that they were teaching, there were 1 or 2 students in the class in those upper level math classes.
So I guess my question is, in the aggregate, would there have been a bigger financial gain from moving the graduation rate up 25% from where it was at baseline, or from cutting specific programs? And how did you make the decision to do program specific analysis instead of looking at it from the student success lens and saying, if we keep students longer, we'll retain more money?
Well, if I understand correctly, and I may not, if we keep more students longer, you would think that we're going to have a better net revenue. But in all of these programs, we were losing every student we were teaching, the institution was losing money because they were net revenue negative. I have the feeling that neither one of us are precisely understanding your question, and I apologize for that. Yeah, so when we were getting ready to shut down the math major, I remember telling the math department chair and the dean, I said, you got to understand, we've got to make a decision now before we admit another math major. Because with every math major we bring on this campus, we are going to lose money, especially as we start teaching it out. So we've got to stop. Probably a better example was the art major. The art major, we actually did not make a decision to cut it, but our one remaining art faculty saw the writing on the wall and took a job somewhere else. The art major was just barely profitable. It really wasn't. And so there, if we suddenly had 80, art students that we could keep, well, then we might generate some revenue off of them. But we had just a handful.
The majority of the ones that we cut were probably less than 10 majors per program.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
And that might even be a generous 10. We had a lot of programs where you had 2, 3, and 4 majors. It's hard to justify keeping that major when you have so few students enrolled. And the other thing that we noticed was enrollment per course. If you have low enrolled courses, those are your most expensive to teach, because that faculty is teaching 3 hours to 2 people. And that's part of their load, and they get to count it as part of their load. And so we looked at course enrollment, and courses that had less than 8 were unprofitable to teach. It's very difficult you're not covering the cost of the faculty to teach that class with 4 or 5 students. You're just not doing it.
The other more brutal answer to your question is, I did not have a choice between not reducing faculty and reducing faculty. So I had to have some faculty walk out. So the question was, which ones? Next question.
And like I said earlier, we looked at a trend analysis for majors over the last 5 years. The low numbers that we were seeing in the year that we were, was it 2022, 21, 2021?
Go for it.
I don't remember which one, but the numbers were not significantly different than the previous 5 years.
Yeah, the trends were flat.
So if it was a low enrolled major in 21, it was also a lowly enrolled major in 2018. We were not seeing significant changes in those programs. We did also keep, environmental sciences or environmental studies and biology, because basically those were the same biology. It was biology repackaged.
Yeah,
when you started looking at the courses that they taught, they were the same as the biology courses, but it was with a different focus. And so we kept those because, one, they were projected to have growth because they were environmental based, and that had a lot of attraction to our students nowadays over a biology major. And it wasn't, but it was biology repackaged with different
really
focus.
costing us anymore.
It wasn't costing us the same faculty was teaching it. They were cross-listed biology classes. It really didn't make a sense to get rid of them because it didn't save us any money. It didn't cut any expenses.
All right, let's go to the next question.
I will say, COVID plus probation made the end of the last strategic plan unexecutable. And
You're on.
I would say that the COVID plus the probation did make the end of the last strategic plan unexecutable. And I've been charged with authoring a new strategic plan. And I think retention percentage and addressing it and breaking it down by academic major, socioeconomic class, et cetera, is going to be an exceedingly important thing to do for the next 5 years.
Okay.
And it's a great question. We've also added 2 graduate programs, we've also added 2 graduate programs designed to keep some of our students for 6 years instead of 4 years. And the discount rate for the last 2 years is 0, as you could predict.
All right, I'm watching the time. Julia, we've got 5 minutes left.
We do have a chat question, but Kevin, are you sure? Okay,
We'll come back to you.
we'll come back to Kevin.
Promise, I'll be quick.
Did you also evaluate administrative positions within the university for revenue saving?
So
Or was your consideration only focused on cutting faculty lines?
So I can give an easy answer is this model, it does not evaluate the staff positions. That's what the question's asking, right? It does not, it assumes you have staff cost, it figures it in, but it doesn't evaluate the efficiency of those staff. Now, that being said, let me say that before I arrived, Pfeiffer's first attempt at being profitable as an institution was letting go staff in a massive wave, so that we are as bare bones an institution staff-wise as any places I have ever worked. There's no bench strength. So we had already done the hard work there. Thank you. Next question.
What other data points are you using for cutting a program, or is this it? Any other significant tools? Is this just the starting point?
So this is the starting point for profitability. But as Mona mentioned, we put in some other non-tangible things like, is the program mission fit? Do we need to get rid of our last religion major? Is the program is the program heavily entwined with our endowment, like Scott mentioned? So there are some non-tangibles, but this is the primary metric we use to decide whether the program is generating revenue. And that's what this is all about. What, any others?
Yeah, sure. So when you look at the timeline you had initially in the slide, that's a long time to go through that level of pain. What slowed you down from getting from point A to point B?
I don't know that I want to answer that question with the camera on.
Okay, sorry. All right. Scratch it.
But I do think I can, I gave a hint at the answer. And so my 2 colleagues here who've been at the institution longer than I can correct me. I think part of that was leadership realizing that the ship was in a very bad position and deciding either something needed to happen or they need to depart. And so leadership was moving in this direction, and it took a while for that sea change to happen, is really, I think, the best answer. What? I mean, these are hard decisions to make, right? It's much easier to get a provost who's close to retirement, whose mortgage is paid for, right, to come in and do this than to get somebody who's 35 and is going to throw their career away.
You also can't. Yeah.
It's already on.
But so we've got 2 new healthcare programs with 2 very strict accrediting bodies, 2 very profitable healthcare related programs with 2 very scrutinizing, rigid would be the almost the negative adjective there. Accrediting bodies eyeing us as well. And we're like on provisional accreditation with those two bodies, trying to get the full accreditation. So there's also the fear that if you do anything too radical on your primary campus, then you could sink the only two profitable programs that you have before they get off the ground. So, I mean, I viewed it as an art rather than as a science. I mean, some of this was done slowly on purpose, but we were, we're building an $18 million health sciences campus. It's built with room for a third program. We're trying to show those accrediting bodies that we're putting a lot of financial resources into those two schools. The president's off fundraising for those two programs in the building every day. And the president is new and he's busy finding new vice presidents capable. And thank goodness we found a provost who had been the chair of over 30 visiting committees, right? So it was slow. Some of that was intentional though. It was important to be very delicate.
All right.